I want to thank everyone for joining us tonight. My name is Kimberly Kay, and I'm the Director of Operations and Editorial Development with Legal Insurrection Foundation. And we're really excited about this event. We're incredibly honored with the company that we have with us this evening. For those of you who have followed our blog, or maybe you haven't followed our coverage of this particular case, we welcome you. We're just glad you're here. And we're looking forward to the opportunity to hear from these individuals firsthand. This particular event, we're discussing the Gibson's Bakery case, which has been a case that's been very near and dear to our hearts, and one that we are thrilled with the outcome for many reasons. And so it's truly an honor and a privilege to be able to have Mrs. Gibson here to tell her side of the story. And we also have with her two attorneys that helped with her case, that represented her in this situation. And so rather than read all of the bios out loud, what I'm going to do is drop them in the chat section for everyone to read, along with links where you can find out more about everyone on this panel. Couple of housekeeping things before we jump into it. You'll notice that we have two separate sections. We have a chat section and we have a Q&A section. We will be answering questions. You can ask questions directly of any of the individuals on our panel. To do so, please put it in the Q&A section, which I will be monitoring through the duration of this event. The chat section is just your opportunity to engage with us, your opportunity to engage with one another. We do ask that you keep it civil and that you keep it on topic. Really, we never have an issue with that. I just feel compelled to remind people, just in case. We'd rather not have a spicy chat section this evening. But if you have any questions, if there's anything you want more information about, please feel free to put it there. I'll be monitoring that throughout this discussion as well. And we do appreciate your support. We are a nonprofit entity. All of our programming is always free. And I think we're learning more and more. We run an incredibly lean budget, and every single penny that we make, we put right back into the work we do, whether it's investigations or education and programming. And things of that nature. So we appreciate your generosity and support. And so with that, I'm going to pass it to Professor Jacobson, who many of you are very well acquainted with. And he is the founder of Legal Insurrection, and he's also a clinical law professor at Cornell's Law School. And he's been my boss for 8 years. I have tremendous respect and admiration for him. And so he's going to go ahead and talk a little bit about this case.
Thank you, Kimberly, and thank you to the panelists who are here. People in the audience may think this just happens, but actually Kimberly puts a lot of work into these things, so we thank her for each of these events, including for tonight. This is for me, and I'm not going to talk very long because I know you didn't come here to hear me talk. You hear me talk all the time. I didn't know if we'd get to this night when I first started covering this case. I think it was the second week in November 2016, if you can believe that. But we're approaching 6 years since this all started. And we started covering it really because we just always kept an eye on what happened at Oberlin College. It's been something that, as a website, we need content and we cover colleges, and Oberlin College was an endless supply of easy content for us to follow, because there was always something going on at the college, or there was dining hall protests or whatever it happened to be. And so we just kept an eye on Oberlin. I never thought this would turn into what it did. And I saw this story about a protest. And actually, I think the first story I saw about it was about the community coming to the defense of this bakery that was having protests. And so I started to look into it. We started to follow it. And it really, was of interest in and of itself. And we covered it for about a year. But I think what really piqued my interest in it and made me realize that this was something, as a small organization, we needed to get into, was when Oberlin College filed its answer in the lawsuit. And I remember writing at the time, I think it was December, and I might be messing up years. I think it was December 2017. And they just kind of, in the answer, viciously attacked the Gibsons. And I remember writing at the time, based on what I have seen, unless there's something we don't know about, this is not going to work. This defense is not going to work. Yet they plowed ahead and we continued. And that's really, and as it moved towards trial, we decided that this was going to be the first major project of the newly formed Legal Insurrection Foundation. We were just a website when this started. Now we're a 501c3 foundation. And so when I heard this was going to trial, we found a very good freelance reporter in Ohio who lived about an hour from Oberlin, or about an hour from where the trial was taking place, which was not in Oberlin. And we said, let's do this. We hired him and said, okay, it's going to be like a 2-week trial. We can afford that. And then, of course, the trial turned into 6 or 7 weeks. And we're like, oh, my God, I hope we survive as a website on this. But he covered it every day and we posted the coverage every night. But I also would get reports from him. And I knew something was doing because, well, he didn't use this exact wording. It was kind of like, call 911 because Oberlin College's defense is getting massacred in the courtroom. Okay. And so I was getting this feedback and he was, and so when the verdict came down, I'm not going to say I predicted $11 million for the compensatory, but it was clear that things were just going so wrong. And, when they came down with that, so finally we got like a spotlight because we'd been the only national entity covering the case. I just knew in my gut there was something wrong here and we needed to cover it. And we covered it through the punitive damages and obviously, 2 or 3 years of appeals. And now it's over. Legal Insurrection, the website is approaching 14 years old. Hopefully we'll be here another 14 years. And I really can say that this has been a very meaningful event for us. To paraphrase Churchill, when we look back upon this some point in the future, I think this will be, our finest hour of coverage. I mean, it was just relentless. I've come to admire the strength of the family and the skill of the lawyers. And really, I think this for us is somebody who kind of addresses issues of, it's now trendy to call it wokeness, but cancel culture, whatever you want to call it in society and on campuses. This case really came to symbolize one family standing up to an institutional power, and we admire that so much. So I thank everybody for being here. And the format is, I've got some questions for the panelists, and you can put questions in the Q&A, and when I'm done asking my questions, we'll get to reader questions, and we really do want you to ask some questions. And so, Lorna, I'll just start with you. There must be at this point just a whole range of emotions that are coming over you now that the case is finally over. And I was hoping you could just explain to the people watching what you're feeling, what you're thinking, looking back on what has happened, and what you would want people to know.
Well, it's been a really long battle, as you know, and now that it's finally over, it's bittersweet. I'll be honest, it's very bittersweet. My husband did not see the end. My father-in-law did not either. But as for the business and me now, I've got a lot of work ahead of me. I've got a lot of work to try and bring everything back that we've lost in the last few years.
Explain that to us. This is a 5th generation, I believe, business. Talk about that and why that was important to you in terms of sustaining the business and what lies ahead for you.
Well, the business is very important. It was my husband's life, and he was the 4th generation. My son is now the 5th. And we've been around over 100 years, serving the community and surrounding communities. And it's just very important that I continue on and move everything forward again in a very positive manner.
After the compensatory verdict came back, we had a videographer there, and he took a video of your husband, and I think you were with him, and I think your grandson was with him. And he said, and he was very teary, and it brought me to tears watching that this might allow you to keep the lights on for another generation. Talk about that, how important that was to David.
That was very important to David. That was his final wish to me before he passed, was that I continue forward as long as I possibly could and keep the lights burning.
What was it like when, I mean, you sat through the trial, you're waiting for the jury to come back with its first verdict. What are you feeling? Do you think you're going to win?
Well, first of all, I wasn't allowed to be in the courtroom because they had subpoenaed me. But at the end for the verdict, I was allowed in. And honestly, when I heard it, the only thing that crossed my mind was a lot of relief that maybe now life could go back to where it was and we could just go forward and keep the store going.
Your family came under really fairly intense attack from the moment of that shoplifting incident. Just tell the listener, the viewers, what that's like. It's, I've heard people describe it as kind of an out-of-body experience that all these people are calling you names and accusing you of things that are not true. What was that like both for you and also for your family?
Well, it was devastating. It was very scary during the protest. I'll admit, I was very scared for my family and my workers. And it just was very hurtful that people could try to destroy someone's reputation so quickly with basically lies. It was just very hard to walk down the street and feel that you were getting pointed at.
Yeah, I remember at some point it was reported that you had to lay off a number of employees. What was that like? Because it seems like you have a pretty tight-knit, employee staff.
Absolutely. The staff is really like family at the store. They always have been. Before this happened, we had over 20-some employees. After this happened, with the business falling as sharply as it did, we are down to about 5 employees now. And it's been very difficult to keep it going with so few.
How did the employees react to this? Were they supportive of you? I'm just curious how, when you have such a tight-knit family of employees and they see the business and in fact their jobs being attacked, I'm curious what that sort of reaction was.
Well, they were very understanding when we had to lay them off, but they were all very scared too. There was a lot of tension going on in town, and everybody basically kept watching their back. I mean, it was very scary in town, but the workers all understood, and they were 100%, in support of us, because they had seen over the years that it didn't matter who you were or what color you were. Everybody was always welcome at the store. We never turned anybody away.
One thing that struck me is in one of the comments you made recently, you indicated that you hope the students will come back and shop at your store. And you hope that you can do business with the college again. And what struck me about that was the openness that you have to reestablishing that relationship. Talk to us about why that's important to you.
Well, again, everyone is welcome at the store, and I would love to see everyone come back. I would be more than happy to get contracts back with the college, or have them at least open discussion. Yeah, I would very much be open to that.
How has the community reacted? Has this created a split between the community and the college, or just tell us what the local atmosphere is like now?
We've had amazing support from the community and from all the surrounding communities. We've had supporters from clear across the United States calling or writing. Everyone has been very supportive, actually. So that has really helped to get through the hard times.
Looking back on it, if there was one thing you wanted people to know about this story, what would it be?
You know, the truth matters. Don't be so quick to jump and judge when you really don't know the facts or what went on. I just think everybody needs to really just relax and just don't come to a conclusion just because another person's told you something.
And I think that was one of the trial themes, that the truth still matters. A few questions for Lee and for Owen. You guys made this look so easy to the outside public, but we know it wasn't, okay? We know it wasn't. I mean, I've never seen so many motions filed in a case in the 35 years I've been doing this. Talk to us about what it was like, and I'll let you pick whoever wants to go first, but I want to hear from both of you. What was it like to fight this battle?
Well, maybe we'll go in the order of age.
Okay.
So first of all, on behalf of the entire Gibson family and their 137-year legacy, we'd like to thank Legal Insurrection. We'd like to thank Professor Jacobson, and we'd like to thank all of the readers, because although you did not know it at the time, and the time that this family was going through the challenge, Legal Insurrection, Professor Jacobson, and you readers gave the family the support and the courage that they needed to persevere in what literally was a David and Goliath battle. And you don't know this, but every night, our trial team, before we would retire for the evening, and the evening wasn't the evening, it was always 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning, because as Professor Jacobson said, there was an onslaught of motions and efforts. And, you know, we had $1 billion bully doing everything they possibly could to destroy this iconic bakery. So every night we actually would read Legal Insurrection, because, and not because we had time on our hands, but because we knew that from the collective minds and observations of everybody, you were making comments, and we wanted to make sure that in this battle that we didn't miss any nuance that one of your readers or Professor Jacobson may have identified, so we could incorporate it into our presentation. And because, to be frank, we needed every advantage we could get. And if it looked easy to some of the readers, then, you know, I've got a bridge to sell you in Brooklyn, because it wasn't easy, and it was against all odds. And the fact that Legal Insurrection stepped up, reporter Dan McGraw did an excellent job. He was in the courtroom every day. Judge John Maraldi did an excellent job controlling the courtroom, because when we started, the other side was telling him this was going to be a 6-month trial. And of course, they would have beat everybody into submission if it had gone that far. So, as is unfortunately the habit of trial attorneys, my long-winded answer is so long, Professor, that I don't even know what your question is at this point.
Keep going. I'm enjoying it. The question was, it looked easy to outsiders, but tell us what was hard about it.
Well, the combined firepower of, you know, they had unlimited resources. They could spend whatever they wanted. And because of that, it really was, the David and Goliath battle. And I'm glad that we've been able to maintain David's undefeated streak in that regard. But it was difficult. At different times they had 12 attorneys, or 11 or 12 attorneys we counted in the courtroom. The odds and the onslaught did not abate after the trial, because we ended up counting, they ended up with 4 or 5 law firms, over 20 some attorneys from national firms, some of the biggest firms, whether they're from Washington or anywhere around the country. As you saw and you commented, when it was time for the appellate work, they were able to encourage or motivate 5 or 6 friends of the court to file briefs on their behalf. And as you know, the Latin word is amicus, which is a friend of the court. But they truly weren't friend of the court. They were friends of Oberlin, and we didn't have the ability to round up and encourage 6 amici, because it takes a lot of resources to file amicus briefs, and you can spend $20,000 or $50,000 per amicus brief when you're at that level. And they of course did the same thing in the Ohio State Supreme Court. So it was a battle, but again, the only thing that was on our side was, as Lorna says, the truth and the courage and the wind beneath the wings of the Gibson family. And that was 130-some-year-old wind, and they weren't going to let it go, and we weren't going to let it go. And it was our honor to be involved. But again, going back to, I think legal insurrection and its readers played a significant part in keeping our spirits up, keeping the energy of the Gibson family up and the courage up. So, Owen, of course, is very talented attorney that was right there, and he probably has additional comments.
I would say Lee handled that answer perfectly, but our small team just worked so well together. I don't think we ever felt like we were out equipped by their army of lawyers and law firms, and so we could handle all the motions and all the depositions. But I think what was hard was we knew what was at stake. There was a lot at stake. This family's reputation. We know that reputations take a long time to build, 137 years in this instance, but can be so easily torn down. And then it's even harder to rebuild those reputations, but they're worth fighting for. And so, with us in that fight was David and Grandpa. David, the jury didn't know, but David was going through pancreatic cancer at the time. And so we saw him every day going to trial, and I saw him easing into his chair, and it was hard. And I saw pain that he was in, and he was exhausted, but he was fighting every day because he knew what he was fighting for. There was a lot at stake. Grandpa Gibson, 90 years old, sat through 5 days of depositions, 19 hours. Grandpa Gibson, 90 years old, sat through 19 hours of deposition testimony. David, 20 hours of deposition testimony. Lorna, 10 hours of deposition testimony. And so why were they doing all that? And why were we doing that? We knew this was important, and we knew to try to recapture, rebuild that reputation that this family, this bakery has built over all those years. You had to stand up for it, and we were proud to do so.
Were there any moments in the courtroom that stand out to you that, when you have to tell the story, this was when I knew we had it, or this is what I remember? What are 2 or 3 of the key moments that maybe don't get reported, but you sense them in the courtroom when you're physically there that jump out at you?
So there were a few, and the difficult thing in this case, and the trap many trial lawyers fall into, is that, you know, it's the KISS principle. You're supposed to keep it simple, stupid. In this case, there were too many things that could have been on a highlight reel. And our challenge was to keep in mind that maxim that all trial lawyers know of, keeping it simple, stupid. And you're supposed to go to the jury with two primary themes, 3 at the absolute most. And we had a half dozen, and each of those themes were triggered by the conduct of the Oberlin administration. And some of those things made Oberlin appear to the jury as if they were from another planet. Some examples include, and one of the things that we had the most fun with was when Oberlin was trying to justify why very shortly after they falsely accused the Gibsons and there was demonstrations, when they tried to justify why they canceled the long-standing order of the Gibsons that was over 100 years old, and they had already testified that they were very pleased with the Gibsons' products, their quality, their service, the pricing, you know, so all the boxes were checked. And so we asked them, well, if all the boxes are checked, why would you cancel a long-standing order and try to bring the Gibson family and Gibson Bakery to its economic knees? And the chief of staff at that time testified in front of the jury that the reason they had to cancel the orders was that they were afraid that in the dining halls, the Oberlin students would throw the Gibson food products on the floor and stomp on them. And it stunned all of us. It stunned me. And we went back and broke another cardinal rule of, you know, once you get a good answer, don't go back to gild the lily. But I couldn't help myself. And even though I've been practicing, you know, now it's 46 years. So I said, you mean, and I actually took my foot. And if you hear in the background, I was stomping in front of the jury. You mean you were afraid that they were going to stomp on the food in the dining hall? And I said, isn't that what nursery school students do? And he acknowledged that. So that was an event. And again, there's several, and Owen and I can maybe take turns going back and forth. So I'll pitch it over to Owen. Owen, what was something that stood out in your mind as one of those crystallizing events?
Yeah, and you're right, there's so many, but one that comes to mind that I thought was so significant. There was testimony about Grandpa Gibson loving to sit out front of the store at a table in the front of the store, and for years and years, people, he loved to hold court. Everybody would gather around, and he'd talk to him. He'd talk to everybody that came by. Just he'd love that. And there was testimony that after this happened, these protests happened, and the names and the accusations against this family occurred. There's testimony that David would look out the window from inside the bakery and see his father, Grandpa, sitting out at the table, waiting for someone to come back and sit down and talk with him, and no one doing it. People passing by, and just a heart-wrenching story. And that's part of what we were fighting for. And that's what David talked about, that he had to correct that. He had to get their name back and their reputation back. I think that was very significant.
In addition to that, you know, one of the technical legal battles we had to fight was the college saying, look, we can't control the students. They're students. They do what they want to do. How do you expect us to control them? We felt that they were controlling and encouraging them. And one of the critical things that I think locked up that part of it was there was a retired professor emeritus that wrote in the college newspaper that he thought that the college was not treating the Gibsons well in this situation. And the vice president and dean of students, in response to that editorial, in an email to her colleagues, basically said, with regard to that professor who was, raising a valid issue, she says in black and white, F him. I am inclined, and this isn't an exact quote, but this part of it is, I'm inclined to unleash the students, So at that point, and when she was on the stand, and we asked her, and said, you wrote this, you meant this, you're the dean of students, you understand what the English language is, so you told your colleagues that you would otherwise consider unleashing the students. So unleashing means like they're a pack of dogs, and that's how you intended that your email be written. And at that point, you could hear a whoosh in the courtroom, because everyone just took a deep breath, that here we have the dean of students considering her student body is a pack of dogs. So that was an interesting moment. But I'll pitch it back to Owen again, and maybe we'll give you one or two more examples. But it highlights the fact that, unfortunately, in their arrogance, and that's really what this case is about. It's about arrogance. It's about institutional arrogance, among other things. In their arrogance, they gave us a lot of information, but I'll pitch it back to Owen.
It's potentially that arrogance that led to this next item. When we looked at it, I think it's a entirely different perspective of the world that we saw here. Their damages expert, Oberlin College's damages expert, testified that, really, even if you find in favor of the Gibsons and Gibson's Bakery, they're not worth anything. This bakery is worth $35,000, is what he said. And I'm reading the testimony right here. So summarizing your position, if the jury accepts your analysis, the 134-year-old bakery closes up shop, takes $35,000, and they just have to go out and find other jobs. His answer, yes. Just a total lack of understanding of the value and the worth of small businesses. This business has been the livelihood of 5 generations and so many other employees at Oberlin. They're proud of it. And, when we asked, okay, what did the college pay you to come up with that testimony that this 134-year-old business is only worth $35,000? I think he was paid more than $75,000 to come up with that opinion. So just an entirely different perspective of the worth of hardworking, down to earth, honest people that just go to work each day, put their head down, and try to do right by their families and their community.
I remember that, and I've written about that particular point several times, that they valued this business that had kept 5 generations of people employed. I think it was 20 odd people. There was testimony about how it was David and his son, and I think even his grandson pitched in. They'd get up at 3 or 4 in the morning to make the baked goods that the students could eat in the dining hall that day. And this expert valued this business, this life, at about the cost of a single semester to attend Oberlin College. And that really struck me as the disconnect that I saw way back in the answer filed early in the case. They were in a different orbit. and this one I'll ask to Lorna, but also to the two attorneys. To this day, the one thing we've never seen from Gibson, from Oberlin College, is an apology. Did you ever expect that to come? Do you want that? Would that mean anything to you?
It possibly would be nice. I'm not sure that that's ever going to happen at this point. I think they are in the mindset that it's now over and everything can just go forward. So I'm not sure that's ever going to happen.
And I'll throw that to the attorneys. That does it surprise you at all that even in their statement after they announced they would pay, like they had a choice? Okay, they didn't have a choice, but they made a big PR thing out of it. No, forget even apology, no remorse, no compassion. Does that surprise you at all?
So as the old guy, I'll start again. Yeah, it shocks me. And the reason it shocks me is they have the resources to surround themselves with a lot of intelligent people. In fact, we know during the trial that they hired a crisis PR agency to help guide them through. So you'd think in terms of trying to regain their reputation, they would be the adult in the room, and they and their PR agency would say, you know what, it's been a long battle. It's over now. We want a future. Let's act like the adult in the room, and let's apologize, because the 3 students in open court apologized, and they said that, they weren't detained and arrested because of any kind of racial profiling. They committed a crime. They did wrong. The jury, the unanimous Court of Appeals, and the Ohio Supreme Court has determined that Oberlin did wrong. So you'd think that as long as they're going to write a check for almost $37 million, they would have the hubris to say, we regret what happened. We accept the decision of our jury here in our county, of the Court of Appeals. The fact that they didn't do it is actually matches up with one of the other themes in the case, and that is, our community, our society, our country, I think our world expects that when we send our children to college, there be an adult in the room, and that the adults in the room guide and instruct and educate the students rather than appeasing them, and rather than saying, well, yeah, they may be jumping up and down, stomping on food in the dormitories or in the dining hall. So yeah, I think it's shocking. It's hard to conceive that they haven't yet issued an apology, but it's consistent with their arrogance.
At one point early on, that's all it would have taken too. David went to the college and asked for a retraction. Stand with us. You can make a difference here. Tell them, you know us, these things are not true. And the college didn't do that. And so, the resort was to proceed to trial, and the jury spoke the truth for them, and a unanimous jury did, and that was the vindication the Gibsons were looking for.
Do because so many of the decisions, in my view, from Oberlin College were so irrational. You know who was calling the shots on this? A lot of people have speculated that it was the Board of Trustees, particularly the chairman of the Board of Trustees, but I don't know if that's true. I fully expected when they had a change of presidents that would be the time they would say, okay, what's done is done. It was a prior administration. We're a new administration. We're going to clean the slate. We're going to get rid of this case. We're going to restore the bakery to good standing with the dining hall. I expected that, and it didn't happen. In fact, if anything, things got worse. Do you know who was calling the shots there?
We don't know who was calling the shots, but what we do know is whoever was calling those shots should never call any other shots.
I mean, there are insurance companies or an insurance company involved in this. I believe they paid for the defense. I don't know if that's true or not, or at least part of the defense. Do you think that maybe contributed something to the fact that they just fought to a ridiculous level?
Yeah, we do understand that there was some degree of insurance coverage to cover the defense costs. And again, we can only speculate what was driving it. But if it was insurance money primarily funding the defense, it's always easier to spend other people's money. Mm-hmm. And if the board of directors thought that they were on some sort of philosophical crusade, and they could do it with other people's money, then maybe, that was driving it. Owen, do you have different thoughts?
I don't. No, I don't know what was driving it.
Tell us a little bit about your teams, because the promotional photo we used for this, which was taken by our photographer in the courtroom, because I guess the court allowed photography as long as you didn't show a witness or something like that. But when it was over and you're all gathered there in front of where the judge would sit when court's in session, you had a lot of people there. Your law firms had to have thrown everything you have into this. And for the viewers who don't know, one of the things that shocked me is the time that your firms put into it. You put in for attorney's fees and you had to prove your time. And I believe this was at the trial. Who knows what it is after the appeals? It was something approaching $6 million. That's got to be tough for law firms to bear. And it wasn't just you two in the courtroom. You had others from your law firm. Tell us about that. Not many law firms could handle that. And you don't get paid until you win and you collect.
So maybe there's two answers. Maybe these two law firms are two law firms that formed the team. Maybe we're just half crazy. But I think we drew our courage and resolve from the Gibson family. And you're right. It did weigh on our law firms. And each of the law firms had, at different times, 3 or 4 attorneys, there on the front line, sleeping in Lorain County for 6 weeks. The amazing thing, and what I congratulate our team on, is, that trial attorneys, at least historically, have the reputation of being, high strung and, maybe not the easiest people to get along with. But our trial team throughout this whole thing, with a very talented and energetic attorneys from both sides, I can't imagine. I don't recall any disputes. We worked through everything. And I think that what bound us together was knowing that because of the difficult odds, the power on the other side, that we had to stay together. We had to be a band of brothers and sisters. And without that, David never could have beat Goliath. So I'm very proud of our trial team. I'm very, very proud of the talented attorneys in both firms, and it worked. Owen?
I totally agree. It was such a pleasure working with these two firms together. It's such a great team, such an enjoyable experience. I just briefly want to mention those other people, because you're right, Professor Jacobson, it wasn't just us two, but my partner, Terry Moore, was involved really from day one, and worked with Terry a long time. He's just a brilliant strategist and had an unwavering belief in this case, and just amazing at some of the damages analysis that he undertook. Jackie Caldwell was there throughout the trial, super intelligent. Matt Onest and my paralegal Marty Wolf just did a fabulous job. And I know with Lee, Brandon McHugh just did an amazing job. Janan Wickham and his wonderfully talented paralegal Beth Burns as well. Just, it was such a pleasure working together, and we knew we were on the right side, and it was for a good cause working with this great family.
Final question for the attorneys before we go to listener questions. Without going, and this is something that's been asked in the comment section of our website, without going into the Gibson's personal tax situation, but kind of more generically, people are wondering, what do the taxes look like in a case? Because this is a very complicated case. You've got economic damages, you have tort damages, you have multiple plaintiffs. So again, not to disclose the Gibson's personal taxes, but what does it look like when you've got this sort of complicated situation?
It looks like an extremely complicated buffet table that's been upended, and then you try to figure out how to put it back together to minimize the taxes. You're right, and in that regard, to make sure that we're doing everything we can for the Gibsons' future, we have retained, and the Gibsons have 4 or 5 experts in that regard to try to put all these pieces together, because there's a whole bunch of issues. And actually, we're working on those issues at the current time. Terry Moore has been mentioned. He's leading that part of our team's evaluation. But maybe Owen has found some clarity in taxes, and if he has, then you're a genius, and we'll start a wing of a law school for you somewhere.
Don't start that wing yet, because I'm not weighing in on the tax analysis.
Yeah, I always say when those things come up, that's why God invented accountants, because
Exactly.
I can't figure out. One final question for Lorna. A number of readers have asked us, what can they do to help the Gibsons now? What can they do?
Well, again, come on into the store. All the support is really appreciated. And again, I just want to start getting the store back and bringing customers back in. So everyone can just come on down and visit and see what we have.
And you do take online orders also, right?
Yes, we do. We do have an online shop, and we actually have been in process of sending different merchandise and baked goods across the United States.
Great. With that, I will turn it over to Kimberly, who has been looking at the questions in the Q&A, and will ask some of those.
Yeah, we have over 50 questions, so we'll do our best to get to, or at least cover some of the broader topics being discussed in the question section. And there's quite a few questions about whether or not, following this case and following the verdict, there's been any change in Oberlin policy or guidance. And to your knowledge, has there been any change whatsoever? Have they advised students, hey, maybe don't shoplift from a store and cause a riot and then, cost us upwards of $30 million? Has there been any kind of guidance like that to your knowledge?
No, not to our knowledge. And maybe that's exemplified by the fact that Oberlin has not been able to bring itself to apologize. So I think a recognition of a problem and that you've got a problem is the first step. So they've got to recognize that, and then they've got to change their policies because of that. They haven't. We've heard nothing. And to me, that's just, as I said, tone deaf. Owen, have you heard anything?
I have not, no.
Okay, my apologies. I have a bunch of children running in and out, slamming doors, and making lots of noise. I had to wait just a second. So next question, and I think this is a great question too. To your mind, and in retrospect, how big of a role did the police body cam play, or did it?
It played no role because from the beginning, it was very clear that crimes had been committed, and you know, the police body cam, if it would have been used, and it was not introduced. The only reason that it would have been introduced is to create some sort of racial animus diversion. And really that wasn't the case, because if it's very clear that a crime was committed, you don't need the after the fact body cam of a young man, you know, being upset that he was apprehended.
You know, and that young man accepted responsibility. He did enter a plea, and so at trial, we weren't focused on the student's conduct at all. It was time for the college to accept responsibility, and if they didn't, the jury had to impose that responsibility upon them. So the trial was entirely focused on the college's conduct.
And to that point, just for your readers, I hope it's clear, the students were never named as defendants in this case. This was not a case about students. This was a case about adults not being adults and not taking responsibility. And it was just, you know, our case was against the adults. You know, students are students, 18-year-olds are 18-year-olds, but that's why you have to have an adult in the room. When a family is paying $60,000 or $70,000 a year to send their children somewhere, you'd think that it would be reasonable for the family to expect that there'd be adults in the room. And there weren't in this case.
That's a great point. The next question that we have, and there's again been a handful of questions kind of in the same vein, is probably more for Mrs. Gibson, and the amount of support, or whether you had any support from local businesses throughout the trial.
There was a lot of tension in town. A lot of businesses, it seemed, well, it was almost the perfect storm, because then the pandemic hit. So there were a lot of businesses that did fail or close down. So it seemed like the entire town just was very separated of businesses and things for a while.
Which is such a shame, and I'm so sorry you had to deal with that.
I think
isolation of that in the midst of everything else going on.
right. If we can add to what Lorna says, and Lorna's probably too polite to say it, but we reached out to other businesses that had been, you know, historically victimized by shoplifting, and you know, we tried to get some additional evidence in there so the jury would understand. It's my personal belief, and Owen can give his, but the reason none of these businesses came to support the Gibsons is they were intimidated. When you have a small town and you have an economic Goliath, and everyone has to rely upon that Goliath, you know, they're not going to stick their necks out. We were fortunate that some of the townspeople did, but I'm not sure, Owen, if we got any support from any of the businesses or business owners. We got support from individual Oberlin residents that had dealings for decades and their families before them. But Owen, did any businesses do anything to help the Gibsons?
Certainly not openly. And I know we reached out to some and we heard those fears and the repercussions that they were worried about. And that's why I think it was so brave of the witnesses that did step forward, those individuals that Lee's talking about. And they were risking a lot just to show up at trial and testify about knowing this Gibson family for 60, 70 years of living in the community. And they spoke from the heart. And I really think that was important for the jury to hear, because we heard stories of people that wanted to shop at Gibson's would ask if they could go in through the back door because they were worried if they were seen entering a Gibson's bakery that they would be shunned. And so that's the kind of thing that was going on in the community.
I mean, the viewers may not know, but I've written a couple of times about it. There was a student who wrote an article, not in the main student newspaper, but in some subsidiary sort of newspaper, a month or so after this incident. And he referred to the culture of theft at Oberlin College, that he interviewed a lot of students, and that before there was the COVID pandemic, there was the pandemic of shoplifting from small businesses, and the students considered themselves entitled to steal small things. And I think I read someplace, Lorna, that your bakery suffered, I think the number I saw was about $10,000 of theft every year. I don't know if that's accurate or not, but maybe you could talk about the problem of shoplifting that all the stores faced.
Well, I couldn't give you a number because truthfully, I really never was totally involved with the business until after David's passing. But I do know for a fact that over the years, we've always had shoplifters. It could be anything from a pack of gum up to, again, a bottle of wine. It was just a very common occurrence. But again, the way my husband handled it was you always called the police, and basically he never wanted the kids to be punished. He just wanted apologies, and depending on what the circumstances were, maybe community service. But his main goal was to always try to teach them right from wrong, because he just never wanted to ruin anybody's life for doing a stupid shoplifting incident.
Yeah, I don't know if this was part of the trial or not, or I read it elsewhere, but the issue was that the college was afraid to crack down on the shoplifting, and that's why they told David when he went to see them before the lawsuit that if you wanted the business back with the college, you had to agree that they would call the college when you caught a shoplifter, not the police. And that, you know, part of what was going on here, this culture of theft, is that the administration was afraid to clamp down on student shoplifting. Did that come up at all during the trial, Owen and Lee?
In fact, it did. There was testimony from David and another gentleman who accompanied David to a meeting with the administration, and their quid pro quo, if you would, to resume the orders. The testimony was that they had, the Gibson family, the Gibson bakery had to agree to, when they caught a shoplifter, not to call the police, call the dean of students or the college instead. And the testimony continued to the fact that the college wanted the Gibsons to give first-time apprehended shoplifters a free pass. And David told them that would put them out of business if the word got around the campus that you get one free shoplifting incident in which you're caught. You're not always caught the first time. And he said, they just couldn't do that. There were some other, maybe related nuances that Owen remembers, but that's what I believe that the evidence showed.
I don't remember anything else. I think
No, go ahead.
Yeah.
Did you have something to add to that? I didn't want to cut you off.
No, I don't. I do recall that there was some, I'm not sure if it came through depositions or trial testimony, but I think other area businesses that were dealing with similar shoplifting problems in fear of repercussions that the Gibsons experienced, instead of calling the police, would put up little sticky notes on the shelves saying, "You stole this product. This hurts my business. Please don't do it again." Different way of handling things. But I know David thought that's not right. People need to be held accountable so they can learn. They learn their lessons, and that was important to him. But as Lorna said, never for purposes of punishment, but hey, this is it's right and wrong, and you need to accept responsibility in order to move on.
And that was actually one of the trial themes. One of the trial themes was that nobody is above the law, and you should not expect special treatment just because you're a student at Oberlin College or the administration is attempting to carve out special treatment for you. So again, that was one of the numerous themes that really resonated.
So we just have a couple more questions and then we're gonna go ahead and wrap up. But there have been a couple questions too about whether or not the reverberations of this particular verdict have touched any other colleges dealing with some of the same issues. That might be a question better for Professor Jacobson as we cover this type of thing broadly, not just in this particular instance, but across the country. But is there anything that y'all have seen since the verdict was initially rendered that suggests to you that this has kind of been a wake-up call for other colleges who might attempt to do something similar?
And that's for Professor Jacobson.
Well, that's for anyone who cares to answer.
I'll address this, and then we are going to wrap up real soon. And I do have one more question for this panel. A lot of people ask me, does this set a precedent? Does this show you can sue the colleges and collect money? And what I've said publicly many times, having been a civil litigator for 22 years and now at Cornell for almost 15 years, I have never seen more vicious litigants than universities, because they combine power and wealth with self-righteousness. And people don't understand that universities are simply big corporations who are in the business of education, but they might as well be in the business of chemicals or oil production or anything else. They fight like anything. And so what this case shows to me is that, yes, David can win. Yes, the good guys and gals can win, but it has to be the right circumstances. You have to have excellent attorneys who are willing to take a case on a contingency fee, and that's hard to find. And you see it in the campus sexual harassment cases. Even if the evidence is clear that it was consensual, they will fight to the absolute death. So this is a wonderful win for the Gibsons. It's a wonderful win for justice, but I don't know that other colleges have learned a lot of lessons from it. I guess, time will tell from our covering everything. But the last question I have, and we'll wrap up now, for the attorneys is, Lee has had a long and storied career, and Owen, not quite as long, but equally storied. Where do you, when you look back on this, when you're 90 years old, okay, sitting on the rocking chair, okay, talking to the great-grandchildren about your exploits, I mean, about your career, where do you put this in the scope of your life's work?
So I would trade Owen's youth for my quote career.
Well, that's not on the table, so.
Because in any career, you like to redo things. This is, I've been blessed over these 40 some years with a lot of very significant cases. And I've been blessed with the ability of our firm not having to take every case that comes its way. And I think that's what's kept me going, because if you felt compelled that you had to take cases that walked in the door just to, keep the lights on, then I would have retired, a decade ago. In terms of this case, it probably is at the top. And it's at the top for several reasons. The primary reason is always because you've helped change or preserve somebody's life. And if it's such a deserving family and extended family like the Gibsons, then, in your rocking chair test, and that's what the test I think should be for all of us, that warms your heart and it brings a smile to your face when probably you can't walk, but you can still smile. So that's the primary reason. The other reason is because this reinforced things that we should all stand for. And those things are, truth still matters. It has to. Because if it doesn't, what do we have left? Truth still matters. There needs to be adults in the room. Nobody is above the law and gets special treatment. I mean, that's our country. And if, in fact, this verdict, which I think, we told the jury that this was a tipping point. And we told the jury, and by that time, the courtroom was packed by observers every day and media every day. We told them that the country was listening. And if we can just change one institution to focus on the things that the jury thought was important, then that is by itself enough of a good thing that happened in this case. The Gibsons are wonderful. They deserve everything. And if this case would have gone another 6 years, we would have been there. And I know Owen and his firm would have been there. But we've received, starting with legal insurrection, because they were the first ones that recognized that this case would resonate. But in the meantime, we've received international media. We have newspapers in the United Kingdom writing about this. So the hope is that someone will say, remember the Gibsons. And instead of treating our kids, our students, like nursery school students, let's sit them down, teach them what the world is about, and teach them that they can't be babies. So if we've helped, and if we've helped some students or group of students do the right thing and become better citizens, then it's all worth it. So it is very rewarding. It was, we are all, our entire team is very proud to be involved in this. And I think we've done some good. And that passes the rocking chair test. Thank you.
And just briefly, I know when I'm in the rocking chair many years from now, hopefully, I won't remember the technical legal issues, punitive caps, and all the particulars of defamation law. But what I think I'll remember are the people that we worked on this case with. it was such an honor spending so much time with David and Grandpa Gibson and working with Lee and the other individuals on our trial team. I remember after, living together for 7 weeks up there in the hotel, and trial was over and driving home, I stopped at a gas station and got a newspaper, and it was on the front cover of the paper. And I remember thinking, I'm really going to miss this, because I don't know if we'll have other good cases and fun cases and important cases, but this was special. And it really felt like we were standing up for good people, common decency, common sense, and the truth. And, it doesn't get much better than that. So I hope that's what I remember.
I know Kimberly has a couple of closing comments, but I just wanted to thank everybody for coming here, both the panelists and also the readers. I appreciate the kind words that were said. And Lorna, let your family know that the legal insurrection community is still pulling for them. And we will certainly encourage people to buy your cookies online, because I've had them and they're very good. And we really do wish your family the best. And although you've gone through a lot of heartache in many different ways during these 6 years, I think you have emerged with your dignity and with your honor and with your reputation. And that's something that once lost is hard to get back, but I think you've gotten it back.
Thank you. If I may say one thing, I did want to thank my team of lawyers, because they were amazing. But also, I do want to thank Legal Insurrection, because you guys have been there from the start and throughout this entire 6 years. And I really do appreciate all the coverage, and just being there. It really helped for me to sit and look through all the comments and things every night. It gave me some hope. So thank you very much.
Yes, and for those who are still with us, just know that we read everything that you write in the comments, and particularly when it's an issue that's close to our heart, whether that's this case or things that I've shared about my son. Those comments are so impactful, and they make such a difference when you're dealing with difficult things. So please know that in some small way you are making a difference when you share your support, even on a blog comment. Don't ever underestimate the power that your words have on other people. So I do have one very last question for you, Mrs. Gibson. Someone is asking about the jumbo Buckeyes, because people have been pulling up the store, says that they look wonderful, and is asking if you could just tell a little bit about what that is. And now I'm curious. I want to know too.
It's actually it is a homemade recipe. It's like a caramelized peanut butter, and then they're dipped in our homemade fudge, and then they have crushed pecans on them.
That does sound amazing. It sounds particularly amazing. And again, I just want to say thank you so much, and thank you for all you've done. At least to my mind, this is not, you can look at this many different ways, but I think this is truly a right and wrong, and standing up for right. And I have tremendous respect for you in refusing to back down and refusing to give up. And I know it has been an incredibly long journey from you, but you have my admiration and my utmost respect for everything that you've done, and just refusing to take it. So thank you for that. And again, to our panel, thank you all so much for joining us this evening. We appreciate all that you've done, and I know the work that you'll continue to do. And we thank you for taking time to share with our readers and with us, and to give us a little bit more insight in everything that y'all have experienced over the last 6 years. And for everyone that joined us, there have been quite a few questions about video. We will be posting video. We record all of our sessions, so you can look for that on the blog. I'll also make sure that that gets into your inbox if you registered for this event. Whatever email you use to register, you will receive a copy of the video once it's ready for publication. So with that, good night.
Good night.
Y'all again. Take care.
Good night.
Thank you.